Alex here with a legal nuts and bolts video on where does the blame lie. I've seen comments about this a number of times before, and I always kind of pondered it, but I never did a video on the topic. So the comment, the comments, plural, generally, I'm going to split this video into two parts. The blame between the parents and the family court system, and then I'll do a second part on the blame between the legislature and the judiciary. So starting with the parents and the the family court system. So there's two perspectives, really strong perspectives. The first perspective is it's the parents' fault because they chose a bad partner. So if you don't want to go through the court system and go through all these horrible situations and have your child be abused and all that stuff, then you should just choose the right person, and it's your fault for choosing the wrong person. That's the first sort of approach. And usually that's from people that are not really the proper person members. Usually it's from, ordinary people that are outside of the court system that really don't understand. Then there is the other side of the equation, which is the people in the court system. And a lot of them have this idea that the government and the court system needs to pay more attention and find out who the problem parent is and deprive them of custody. And that goes to an extreme, really. Um, when you don't want to do the research or pay the attorney fees, which I usually paying the attorney fees for a high conflict case is six figures easy. So for most of us, it's the work. It's if you don't want to do the work, you don't think it's fair, you think the statutes are too complicated and convoluted, and having to put together all the evidence is it's too hard, it's not fair, it's complicated, you don't get it, and therefore the system is messed up because they don't do all that for you. Then that's sort of the approach that the other side takes. So the parents tend to blame the system for why their kids are abused, and then the outsiders and the system tends to blame the parents for choosing a bad partner. I think that, and I'm not trying to be, I guess, flippant when I say this, I think that it's somewhere in the middle, but I'm going to be more specific than that because that's kind of like a cop out of an answer. I do think that there is a line, and it's really unfortunate that this isn't talked about more, because I think more people would accept this if this kind of sort of became an understanding between both sides, between the people who have chosen, unfortunately, a bad partner and now they're having to go through a living hell, and then of course their kids are suffering, and then the other side, which is parents feeling like the system doesn't do enough, and that they really shouldn't have to do that much work to protect their child, that the system should really want to protect children and do the work for them. And I know that in some ways there are a lot of reasonable people here that don't believe those things, but they may be somewhere on that sliding scale. And by the way, guys, I do tend to lump certain things into the argument of the system should do more. So I'm not really huge on people who think that calling the police and getting the police to solve the problems, or people who think calling CPS. I know that that doesn't sound good, but if you watch my video on the topic, filing reports and abuse and neglect proceedings, you'll see why I'm saying this. I'm not a huge fan of just call the cops a bunch of times and call CPS and let them sort it out. I'm not. And in fact, judges who say that, because there are some out there, are definitely a part of the problem. And I'm also not a fan of let the kid decide, because of how often that's used by the abuser. And I feel like it just falls into the lazy category, the side that's like, it's too much work, try and prove all this stuff. Let's just let the kid just choose the parent. And I talk about why that usually doesn't work in the video, Teenage Discretion. Finally, I'll go into what I think. I think that there is some blame for the person who chooses a partner who's just not that great. I do think so. And I think that that brings with it some burdens. I do think that when you choose a bad partner, unfortunately, you have to suffer certain consequences. I don't think that you should suffer the consequence of your child being abused, but I do think that you should suffer the consequence of having to go through the court system to try to protect the child. And I do think that that requires a tremendous amount of work. It just does. And unfortunately, I don't think that people should just go into court and think I should just automatically be believed. And since I'm not being believed, then screw you. I think that people have to prove their cases. It sucks. It's hard. You have to think outside the box. It takes multiple different steps. It sometimes takes 3 or 4 different hearings. But this idea that you're just going to go into court and flap your gums, and if you're not believed, then that's the best you can do. It's really not the best you can do, and I talk about that in 3 different videos. One of the videos is anticipating the response. Another video is high conflict incompetence, and then the third video is statutes, rules, and case law. And it's hard work, but when you haven't chosen a person that things are going to work out with, that's unfortunately what I think is burdened upon the parent. And even though it's a tremendous amount of work, I feel like that is a fair consequence that we suffer. On the other hand, I don't think that that means that the court system has nothing. I think that the court system has some serious obligations. They have to interpret and apply existing law, and they have to hold evidentiary hearings and get to the bottom of these things. The attitude of end of filings is not end of abuse is a terrible attitude, and too many judges have that attitude. The problems that I discussed in the video, discretion, the problems and that I discussed in the video, self-representation bias, and there's all sorts of other issues where, I mean, do I think parents should have to go to the extent of filing appeals and judicial ethics complaints because they have incompetent judges and judges who just flat out are malevolent in what they're doing? No, that's not fair either. And so I think that the best thing I can do with this video to deal with these comments, because I get them, I've been getting them for years, and I just haven't done a video on it because I didn't know how to answer it. The best thing that I can do for you guys to answer this question of what I think society's answer should be to this problem is that there is work that has to be done on both sides. And if parents have to do all of this work when they can't afford an attorney, because that's just the reality of the situation, and judges have to do their part. And I hope that this video helps people. I have a feeling it's going to be frustrating for a lot of people. I have a feeling that there's people out there who it's not frustrating for because they don't believe me, but maybe because they're doing everything that they can and the court system is just screwed up. And then, of course, from the professionals who I'm pretty sure don't really watch the channel, I'm sure they're frustrated too because they feel like the parents who come into their courtroom don't do anything. They don't do discovery, they don't produce documents, and they just get sick and tired of presiding over the cases and they just stop. And then they just send everyone to mediation and settlement, and then when it doesn't work, oh well, it's their fault, they chose a bad partner. So I think I'm hoping that in the future, maybe 5-10 years from now, there will be more of a discussion that includes parents. And I think that YouTube and Facebook, weird as it may sound, is the answer to that, because the mainstream media sure doesn't talk about it. And without the mainstream media talking about something like this, it really only leaves communities that regular old people use, like YouTube and Facebook. And I hope that as these communities get stronger, people will come to a better understanding of this. And maybe eventually these understandings will manifest into some type of political force where the judiciary will kind of, get in line, or they'll be replaced with new judges who will. So I'm going to go into the second part now, between where does the blame lie between the legislature and the judiciary? And I think most of the blame is on the legislature. I think that the legislature, I don't think that they're doing this as some sort of evil design, but I think that they have noticed that it's just easier to burden the court system with these types of controversial issues. When they create statutes that basically put forth gigantic windows of discretion for the judges to do almost whatever they want, it makes it so that, well, we gave them the power to decide. If they messed up, that's on them. And it keeps the attention off the legislature and it puts it on the judiciary. And when it comes to elections, the judiciary is pretty much the one area where there's often not very much change. And so even when judges are causing all sorts of problems, especially in family court, for the most part, people don't know unless it's something that's been in the news because a judge committed some crime or they cheated on their wife or something like that. For the most part, judicial incompetence, the news, they don't even understand what that is. I'm sure that there's reporters out there who really don't even understand the concept of legal error, because it's a little technical, it's a little complicated. Unless you actually have litigated a case and had a decision overturned on appeal, it doesn't really sink in for you. So I think that most of the blame is on the legislature, because they could enact statutes that are strict and that control the outcomes of these cases a lot better and that control the judiciary and give them guidance, but they choose not to do that. Now, if they did do that, they'd get a lot of flack for it. They would, because people would complain. People would say, hey, it's not fair that my judge couldn't do what I wanted them to do because there were these laws. And, I think that I have a feeling that there are probably a few laws that came from this kind of attitude. For example, the statutes that discuss a child choosing where they should live, I have a bad feeling. I don't know. I didn't do any research on it, but I have a bad feeling that people started to complain that their kid wanted to live with them, and that since the judge didn't let their kid live with them, then the judge is evil. And so I imagine statutes like this got put into place because of that type of attitude from the public. So I'm sure that if the legislature did put forth statutes that were actually useful in high conflict child custody cases, they'd get all sorts of attacks. And unfortunately, that's probably partially why they don't want to touch family law, is because people get mad and legislators get fired, and maybe it's not for the right reasons. Unfortunately, with high conflict child custody not being even a concept, I don't even know if it was a concept 5 years ago, there really isn't going to be much support that they can get from people like us who get it. I mean, if we, on the proper person, saw laws getting passed to control these things, we most likely would not attack the legislature. We would understand why they're doing it. But the parents who are ignorant to it all probably unfortunately would. So even though I think most of the blame is on the legislature and not on the judiciary, I can also see why we ended up with this crappy system that we have today. It's easier for them to just put as much of this on the judges as possible. The judges are more insulated, so if they mess things up, people just blame the judge anyway, and nothing usually happens to the judge anyway. So it seems to me like it's just flown in the way of gravity. I don't think it's some kind of evil conspiracy or that it was designed that way. I just think it's like a slope. Water goes down the slope just like it does there. It's just a natural consequence of decades and decades of family law being family law. I imagine that hopefully in the future, with more parents becoming educated, because now we do have concepts like personality disorders flying around in high conflict child custody, things that people never discussed in the past all of a sudden are being discussed. Now we have joint physical custody statutes. We didn't have that in the past. Now we have states like Texas that are severely curtailing how alimony works. So we also have the clear and convincing evidence statute in Nevada for domestic violence. So there are signs that the legislature is doing more. And I'm hoping that as things go forward, the legislature continues to do more. So, I mean, this isn't really a very positive video. It's trying to set blame where I think blame lands. But I think that it might be helpful to you guys to sort of see what my thought process is, both on where does blame lie when it comes to parents versus judges, and where does blame lie when it comes to the legislature versus the judiciary. So as with my previous videos, if you have any questions, feel free to post them down in the comments below, and I will see you guys next time.